Revolut, Brewdog, Monzo raised millions via crowdfunding. Yet, VCs think it cheapens your brand, and other founders say there's still a lot of stigma associated with crowdfunding. Is that correct? In this episode, you learn all about the pros and cons of crowdfunding and how to smash your fundraising targets should you wish to fundraise that way. My name is Alexej and I help early stage founders scale. Fintech giant Revolut, now valued more than $15 billion, raised not only on one, but on two crowdfunding platforms. Despite having some of the greatest investors on their cap table, Balderton Capital, Index Ventures, Visa, SoftBank, DST Global, Target Global, they raised on Crowdcube and then later on Seedrs, making hundreds, if not thousands, crowdfunding investors multi-millionaires. What is my experience in this? In July 2021, I actually raised £2.4 million on Seedrs, UK's largest crowdfunding platform. A big chunk of that came via the platform. We exceeded our target by 244%. That was pretty much because of the good planning and execution of our campaign. We will cover 10 steps we followed for that in this video. In the past, crowdfunding was associated with stigma from venture capitalists. And during my time running venture capital at a family office, I thought the same way. If your business was good, why would you not just get a branded venture capital fund and enjoy the signaling effect? Why would you get a lot of random retail investors or sophisticated investors on your cap table? And why would you want to manage all of that through a long fundraising process publicly, where you have to answer lots of questions and some of them might be even annoying? And once you raise on a crowdfunding platform, you need to continue to be super transparent with the crowdfunding investors. There's a public forum and discussion board where investors can ask questions anytime they want and where you also provide regular investor updates. All of that can be seen by your competitors. Fun fact, when I was building Europe's largest CBD marketplace, I invested £50 in several brands who raised on the crowdfunding platform just to stay on top of their investor updates. So having reporting like of a public company but without the benefits of a stock market liquidity, what's the point? These were all the questions and views I had back then. However, it's actually not all as bad and the perception evolved quite a bit. There are some really successful companies who raised via crowdfunding and more successful companies raised via crowdfunding. In this episode, I will cover some more examples of unicorns now who raised via crowdfunding, what crowdfunding is, 5 benefits of crowdfunding, 5 disadvantages of crowdfunding, and at the end, as a bonus, how we raised 2.4 million and hit our target and even more, 244% of our target, and I share our playbook with you. So let's start with a few more success stories. Brewdog holds the world record title for equity crowdfunding, having raised a staggering £43 million solely through Crowdcube. I think Crowdcube would not be alive if it would not be for Brewdog. Having used Crowdcube to run 3 hugely successful funding rounds, the platform champions Brewdog as their poster child. And there is a community of 80,000 investors who invested into Brewdog via Crowdcube. You can argue that if Brewdog did not raise via crowdfunding, they would not be as successful as they are right now. Now, the second unicorn I mentioned before, Revolut, the fintech giant. Unlike Brewdog, Revolut decided to play the field, running multiple lucrative campaigns on both Crowdcube and Seedrs. Seedrs, now acquired by Republic, they raised on both platforms to leverage the audience on both platforms because both platforms have a slightly different audience. And prior to reaching their unicorn status, Revolut raised more than £1 million from over 430 investors on Crowdcube. And as part of their Series B, they wanted to raise £3.8 million on Seedrs from 4,260 backers. In 2021, Revolut's valuation was £24 billion. When SoftBank led it. Since then, it dropped to £15.6 billion, but in any case, hundreds, maybe even thousands of crowdfunding investors became multi-millionaires through that. And our third example is Monzo, actually a competitor to Revolut. After listing Monzo on Crowdcube, they struck gold almost instantly, with Monzo breaking the world record for the quickest crowdfunding campaign in history to reach £1 million. They did it in 96 seconds. By the 3-hour mark, Monzo had crowdfunded £20 million. By the way, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you like this content. So, what is actually crowdfunding? Crowdfunding is a method where startups can raise capital directly from a wide audience of sophisticated investors on an online platform. This approach is contrary to conventional funding methods, which often involve a limited number of investors, institutional investors, as a lead investor. In a sense, crowdfunding democratizes venture capital, and in some cases, even private equity now. In fact, you see more and more mature companies going that route, and even some VC funds started raising funds via crowdfunding. Passion Capital is the latest example of that. It's a really famous fund in the UK, and they raised by crowdfunding. Now, there are actually various different platforms out there. Usually, they tend to be specific to a country, given the strict financial regulatory environment and rules, which are country-specific, who and who cannot invest via online platforms. However, with more M&A happening and with Republic acquiring Seedrs, we might see a truly global platform being created, with the ability to run campaigns across the US and the UK simultaneously in the future. Now, crowdfunding is not only just limited to equity-based crowdfunding. You have reward-based crowdfunding, where backers continue to fund in exchange for products. Kickstarter and Indiegogo are famous examples. Peloton raised on Kickstarter in 2013. Peloton raised £220,000 roughly on the rewards-based crowdfunding site Kickstarter. If you want to launch just something innovative, that is actually quite ideal, especially if you're in the consumer industry. Now, there are also debt crowdfunding platforms. If you cannot raise from a bank, for example, agreeing to an interest and a repayment schedule on a crowdfunding platform for that is a very good thing. And of course, if you don't want to dilute your ownership, that's another benefit. And then finally, you have donation-based crowdfunding platforms, where charities can raise funding via donations. Now, let's jump into the pros and cons of crowdfunding. Most of the success stories on crowdfunding were B2C businesses. The benefits are especially true for consumer companies rather than B2B software companies. However, from time to time, you do see B2B companies doing crowdfunding too. So what are the benefits? Let me dive into 5 good reasons why you should consider crowdfunding. So the first one is obviously access to capital. It provides an alternative route for startups that might not have access to conventional funding via venture capital or banks or friends and family for that matter. And later in the video, I can show you how we raised 244% of our target amount. So stay tuned. Now, second one is building brand loyalty. You can raise from hundreds and sometimes thousands of investors, all of them becoming your fans and having skin in the game. That creates a loyal community. It creates word of mouth about your product and your business. Now, the third benefit is retaining control. A lot of the time, when you raise on the crowdfunding platform, you might not have an institutional lead, and therefore you have more control over the terms and the legal terms when you raise on these platforms. And you might not need to give away preferred equity either, and therefore you will have only ordinary shares on your cap table. Now, product validation is the fourth benefit. Because you suddenly have so many investors, especially if you're in the consumer space, you can get feedback about your product pretty quickly. Because you have all these loyal investors, you can actually run various surveys. Ahead of a product launch, or if you want to change something on the product, you have a critical number and a good number of responses. And ultimately, you can leverage a community for intelligence better. Last but not least, the fifth reason is brand awareness and publicity. On top of the investors coming through the crowdfunding platform and spreading the word, you can announce your funding round and get a lot of media coverage. That will create even more publicity and awareness. We worked with a PR firm during our crowdfunding campaign, which meant that we also created lots of other stories, which got us a lot of good headlines, got us into great publications, including Forbes. By the way, if you liked the video, please click the like button. Now let me cover the 5 negatives of crowdfunding. Distraction from the business is the biggest drawback. It's very high on this list. Fundraising is generally not great for your business from an operational perspective, since you're spending hours on activities which have little to do with your sales or hiring people. With crowdfunding in particular, given so many moving parts, you're definitely spending quite a bit of time away from your core business, which is not good. Now, the second drawback are costs. Costs can be quite high if you're not raising a big amount of money, because you cannot spread the fixed cost of that campaign across the large amount you raise, but costs are also a concern if you actually don't hit your target. And if you don't hit the target, you cannot take that money home. There's a fixed fee for running a crowdfunding campaign. No matter if you succeed or not succeed in your raise, you will have to pay that fee to the platform. And then on top of that, you will be charged a percentage of what you raise from the investors coming to the platform. Depending on the platform, it can range from 3 to 7%. And you submit, of course, a list of investors which will be excluded from that fee as they're your investors, so it would be unfair to get charged on your own investors. But everything after that moment and not on that list will be subject to that fee. That is where the platforms make their money. Alongside marketing campaigns they run for you to benefit and to max out your target raise. Failure to raise leads to reputation risk. That's the third factor. So not all product funding campaigns succeed in reaching their funding goal. And crowdfunding platforms protect investors, their own investors, by not allowing funds to be wired to companies if the company has not raised its target amount. The point of setting a target raise is to show the use of funds. And if you raise below that, one can argue that you will not succeed in building a business because you will not get the funding you need. And because it's so strict, there are also quite big reputational risks involved that when you fail to raise that, you're doomed to fail as a business. While it might not be true, it is a serious thing to consider. A mitigation strategy is to set realistic goals, asking enough investors, and understand your audience. And the sentiment of the investor community and the product of that industry is really critical as well. Failure to raise leads to reputational risk, the third factor. So not all funding campaigns succeed in reaching the funding goals. And crowdfunding platforms protect the retail and sophisticated investors by not allowing funds to be wired to the companies who fail to reach the target. If you raise below that target, one can argue that you will not succeed with your business and you will fail, thus losing capital of investors. Because it's so strict, there's also quite a big reputation risk. While this might not be true, it is a serious thing to consider. So the mitigation strategy is for you to set realistic goals, ask enough investors, and understand your audience if you can truly raise that target. Set a smaller target, and knowing that you will hit it for sure is one of the key strategies. And then obviously execute. Having targeted a £1 million raise in our campaign, we raised £2.4 million. That's how we minimize the costs and the failure to raise, and we minimize reputational risk. So the best way is to follow my playbook and click like and follow my channel and click the link below to get it. But let's move on to the fourth negative point, which is very common to hear, is stigma from venture capital. It's true, there are some venture capitalists who have a bit of a stigma with crowdfunding. A lot of VCs assume if you could not raise from VCs, your company must be bad. Crowdfunding was perceived to make your brand cheap and not exclusive anymore. As I mentioned, that is more a kind of old school thinking, and a lot more really successful companies, especially in B2C, are raising by crowdfunding. Or they supplement their venture capital raise with an additional crowdfunding campaign to get the brand advocates and build community. Now, the fifth negative point is public pressure. You almost have to be more transparent in the future about your progress and your results than if you were to raise with the venture capital fund. You cannot really go back on your word as much, and a lot of people could point fingers at you if you miss your targets. Now, you can argue it adds to accountability and it adds pressure, and depending on what kind of entrepreneur you are, that might be a good thing or a bad thing. In my case, this extra pressure and accountability is actually a good thing, and I really like the reporting side of things. Now, let's discuss the 10 steps I followed to raise 244% of our target amount on Seedrs and ending the campaign after just 2 weeks of fundraising, thus limiting the amount of distraction I had. I will cover the high level points here, but if you want the exact steps, please download the playbook below. As mentioned at the start of the episode, I raised £2.4 million on Seedrs at a 12.4 million post-money valuation. How did I do that? Let me walk you through my playbook here. So number one, set a realistic goal. We said we only wanted to hit £1 million, but we knew we had more than 1 million committed already. making sure you have at least 50% of the target raise secured with investors outside the platform. That's the second point, and it expands on the first point. And the more money you have committed outside the platform, the easier it will be for you to show traction. The bar on Seedrs is not just the money you raise on the platform, but also shows the money you raise outside the platform, so you can manipulate it. Third step is to pick the right crowdfunding platform. We knew Seedrs had some really successful campaigns in CBD, and they actually pitched us quite hard to do it, and we became the largest CBD campaign raise in 2021. Study your competition and timing of your raise on the platform. It's a competitive market, and you do not want to have 5 other beauty brands raising while you raise for your own beauty brand. So pick the timing and ask them when is a good window to raise. Now, another step is to start building up the hype at least 1 to 2 months before your campaign starts. That can be achieved by emailing your customers, press releases, pre-registration activity on the crowdfunding platform, and you can use a PR firm if you want to create more buzz around you, and we did that. Now, creating a high quality pitch deck and a high quality video is key. Our video was pretty cheap, less than £1,000 in costs, but it was well structured, high resolution, and had all the right information in it. Create a nice pitch deck, and also think about investor perks and giveaways. Especially small investors love that. Focus on live Q&A sessions during the campaign. Make sure you invite potential investors to webinars and build trust. Answer all questions timely. Make use of the marketing initiatives and tools the crowdfunding platforms give you. Various platforms offer you paid marketing initiatives from their end, that's how they also make money, to activate more of their investors. It can be an email blast to all their subscribers, it can be a paid ads campaign on Facebook or Google, or it can be an additional webinar or a live Q&A. We used an investor email feature where all 40,000 plus investors and Seedrs got to see our campaign. That email blast alone secured £100,000 of extra funding. Keep a strong momentum in your campaign and stagger some of the bigger investor tickets is another one. The way we did that is we didn't register the full amount of funding we received, but had a bit of a drip campaign going on, keeping the pace and momentum of the campaign. Last but not least, creating FOMO. Crowdfunding is ultimately all about creating FOMO, the fear of missing out. If people see your campaign got 100% funded on day 1 and 200% funded 1 week later, they will freak out. They will think you will close out the campaign before they can invest, and therefore they will invest. The final point, once you end the campaign, it takes up 2 months for you to get the money wired to your bank. Crowdfunding platforms don't tell you that, so make sure you know that. Finally, if you want to understand what to do in what order, click below on the crowdfunding playbook link, and I will share with you my hype plan showing how I raised 244% of my target amount in more detail. Thank you so much, guys.